So I made a very simple binding and purfling thicknessing jig out of an old blade from a hand plane that I restored. And I'm now going to show you how I did this. It's really quite a simple concept and very quick to put this thing together. Aside from cleaning up the blade itself, which if you already have a brand new plane blade, you won't have to do. Aside from that step, this actually really only took me about 20 minutes to put together. So the first thing I needed was simply a plane blade, which I gathered from this old plane that really had no hope of ever seeing any future use. And before I start using rust remover on this, I'm just going to sharpen it a little bit with the coarsest grit that I have on my sharpening system, just to get some of the worst of the rust off of the most important part of the blade. Then I clean it up with some rust remover. Here I'm using something called rust free, but you can use calcium lime rust remover, that works just as well, or really any other product designed for that purpose. I'm using a Scotch-Brite pad to scrape around the rust remover, and then I'm removing the rust remover with a rag. And I'll do a couple cycles of this, spraying on the rust remover, scraping off with the Scotch-Brite pad, and removing with the rag. And after several iterations, this plane blade will be about as clean and as rust-free as I need to get it. And now that it's fairly cleaned up, I can take it back to the sharpening system, and now I'm going to sharpen it for real, going all the way through my grits until both the flat face and the beveled edge are flat all the way across and mirror smooth. Okay, so here I've got just a piece of scrap wood to build this off of, and what I think I'm going to do is just place this on here, and I'm just going to get an eye for where I want this to be. This looks pretty good, and I'll just trace it out, including, and in fact this is the most important part, this cutout area, which is where my bolts will go. So then this area down here from the edge of the plane blade down will be an area that I cut out, and then a dowel will come in right here, which will be the surface that the binding strips or purfling strips ride against. This will all make sense shortly. Next I need 2 lengths of threaded rod, about 1 inch long each, and 2 wing nuts. I'm going to cut my 2 pieces of threaded rod from a larger length of threaded rod that you can find available at really any hardware store. Just a little tip for cutting these out. What I like to do is place both of the wing nuts onto the threaded rod first. The first wing nut I will just thread all the way down to the end, and the second wing nut I'm going to actually use as a guide for helping me start my cut. And then once the cut is complete, that first wing nut that I put on there, when I back that out and remove it, it's going to straighten out any crooked threads or sharp burrs that occur from the cutting process. So it really cleans up the end of that threaded rod so that it's still easy to install the wing nuts onto the threads later. Next, I'm taking a hardwood dowel and splitting it down the middle for about 3 or 4 inches of its length. And so one thing that I realized that I failed to account for here was the fact that in the end I'm going to want this whole thing to be able to be set up in a vise. So I want to leave some extra wood down here in the bottom for the vise to grab onto. And so how I had cut this before, that was assuming that I would put this down here at the bottom like this. So what I'm going to do now is just move this whole opening up further, which is fine. I have plenty of room to do that. And I'm going to go ahead and move it up a lot. So the new location will actually be all the way up here. Now I drill 2 holes large enough for my threaded rods to thread into. Now I can install the 2 threaded rods into the holes, and I've added a little bit of JB Weld 2-part epoxy to the bottom of these holes to hold those rods firmly in place so they don't back out later. And once the threaded rods are in place, the plane blade itself can be attached with the 2 wing nuts and 2 washers. And now I can drill holes and attach the dowel. Of course you can just use screws to fasten the dowel down, but I'm actually using smaller pieces of dowel just because I like the process and it gives it kind of a cool look at the end. And this is actually ready to use at this point, but to make it a little more effective, I'm going to add a fence to the side of it so that I can always set the blade square. Otherwise, it's easy to inadvertently set the blade at a slight angle, which then when you're dimensioning your binding or purfling strips, you're going to put that slight angle into the strips themselves. So to determine where square is, first I'm just going to bottom out the plane blade. I'm going to bring it all the way down to the dowel so that the full length of the edge is in contact with the dowel, and I'm going to lock it in place right there. Then I can use the flat edge on the side of the plane blade and clamp a piece of wood in place flush against that flat edge, drill 2 holes, and then fix that piece of wood in place as a fence. And there you have it, a simple yet functional binding and purfling thicknessing jig. As a little bonus here, another thing you can do is cut a thin slit along the side of the fence and install a ruler into that slit. I like to use something with very fine markings like a 64th of an inch ruler. If you learned something here, please give this video a like and subscribe so you can be notified when I release a new DIY guitar making video every Friday. And if you want to really learn more, take one of my structured online courses at ericschaferguitars.com or register for a hands-on guitar building workshop here with me in Burnville, Pennsylvania.